What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are working on part 2 of this ridiculous 11 horsepower motorized bike. So I was going to make an electric start for this, as I said in the end of the previous video, engineering a electric start for it. But I think what will be more appropriate is a kickstart. I don't know, I think a Kickstarter will fit the character of this bike a little bit better, so we're going to try that. So let's get started. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is take off the original pull starter. I don't want to modify this, just in case I want to put it back on, so I'm just taking measurements to make my own. Once I have those measurements, I'll throw it into CAD. Alright, so I think I'm just going to use a solid 3/4 inch shaft as my Kickstarter. So since I'm going to have a sprocket here and then another sprocket mounted to our engine, this is actually going to have to kick forward like this. And then the question is, how fast do I need to kick this down? And then what ratio do I need on this sprocket and this sprocket to get this thing to start? And so we're going to nerd out a little bit here, and I have an idea. Okay, so what I'm going to do is film myself kicking down, which feels ridiculous. And then looking at this wall socket, since I know its height is roughly 5 inches, I can look inside of my video. Oh my gosh, what is that pose? And then with that, I can find out how fast my foot was moving. So here is the math for this thing. Okay, well, in a nutshell, we found out how quickly I'm kicking down. And then with that, I can find the RPM that the big gear will spin. And then to figure out how fast I need to spin the motor itself, I decided to try out AI. And that kind of just turned into a gaslighting session of trying to convince it that it was wrong, until it spit out an answer that I liked. But 400 RPM sounds a lot better than 2000. Alright, well, off camera I went and modeled up a Kickstarter body and sent it to my CNC machine to cut out. Once it was all cut out, I marked out where I wanted to bend these pieces. This one was a little bit difficult because it was kind of a nested bend in between two pieces that I didn't want to bend, but it was nothing a hammer couldn't fix. Now these two pieces were bent, they kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. I then fit in some flanged bearings and then tacked the two pieces together. Now it's time to make a spring back mechanism, and for that I'm using some ABS plastic and a CNC router, and then this coil spring. That was definitely movie magic getting in there. It took way longer than I wanted to get that in. After that, I went ahead and cut a little slit into this shaft, and that should retain one end of the spring. It was about right here where I realized the spring was actually tensioning in the wrong way, so I had to redo that little housing, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Okay, so I have the spring inside of this little box. And then one thing I haven't showed you guys is the heart and soul of this Kickstarter. And it's this one-way gear bearing. This is a starter clutch, I think, off of like those Chinese dirt bikes. It locks up in one way and then is free in the other. But that spring action is just about perfect. I mean, I guess we'll find out once it's on the bike, but I'm really happy how that turned out. Hey, check out my new lathe. I bought it off of Facebook Marketplace for like 200 bucks. It's small and it's really shitty, but it does what I need it to do. That's all I care about. Okay, now the engine side needs a hub, so I'm cutting that out of steel, and then I'm going to weld this dirt bike sprocket onto that. And this is all based on the gear ratios that we calculated earlier on. So the sprocket kind of presses in there, but I'm also going to weld the back end. Sweet. I'm liking the look of that. Okay guys, I gotta admit, this looks pretty cool. I love the contrast of the new cut metal with the rusted look. Alright, so I'm gonna actually work on the kicker of the Kickstarter now, and it's just gonna be this shaft. I think I wanna put a bend to it, and then I'll bend a couple inches outward, like this, and then that'll be where you can put your foot to kick down. Hey, check out my oxyacetylene torch. This was actually given to me by my mom. She used to cut art with it, but she gave it to me because she kind of retired the hobby. Okay, here's me attempting to machine a sprocket, failing. I think it's because it's hardened steel, so maybe that's why. One thing that I love about this lathe is it's weak, which is obviously good and bad, but I really like the idea that my mistakes won't kill me. Unfortunately, that stupid stunt of me stopping the lathe was a big mistake. I ended up shattering the drive gear inside of this box. Anyway, I'll fix that lathe later, but in the meantime, I'm going to weld this hub to the kick arm. That's pretty cool. I think the spring back is perfect. It's not too fast and it's not too slow. Should work. Next step is to put it on the bike. With a few quick measurements, I was able to find out how big these brackets needed to be, and then these kind of puzzle piece onto the existing housing. And then with this unit, I can just weld the whole thing to the frame. It was a little tricky getting the chain to line up, but I think in the end we got it just right. Alright, so I'm getting a little distracted with fixing this stupid lathe that I got. So like, there's a gear in here that was on a shaft for switching low and high, and that completely shattered. Screw it, I'm not getting a new one, so instead we're just going to jerry-rig this to work somewhat like new. This was definitely a quick and dirty repair. I had to extend the wires from the lathe motor, and then after that I just had to put this bracket on and put it back all together. When I first ran it, it made this atrocious noise. Alright, watch this. Impeccable design. I think the screw's going far enough in that it's scratching the gear that's on the shaft going through there. Okay, and then on this side, I just 3D printed a gear and then threw it on the shaft here. And so the reason the motor's on top now is because I just wanted to keep this belt. This was the easiest way to fix this machine. Anyway, I'm gonna stop messing with this. Let's get back on track. Okay, so I want to make a little chain guard for our Kickstarter, and we're gonna try something different and use some 3/4 inch plywood. To get it the thickness I need, I'm gonna have to cut this in half and then glue it on top of itself. From there, we can make the actual chain guard. So let's do that. So if this is 3/4 inch plywood, it should do the trick, and I need just about 1.5 inches for the actual design of the protector. So this should work. So once that glue's set, I threw it on the CNC router and started cutting it out. I had to add these slotted mounts to the main assembly. When I was first designing this, I wasn't sure of the angle that the chain guard was going to have to be at, so I gave myself a lot of leeway. Alright, well, my little fancy coil spring couldn't hold up to the stress, so I had to go back to the drawing board, and I ended up just using a typical tension spring. So I ended up using a shaft collar and then welded a little arm to it. And so now that is how we get our spring back on the Kickstarter. And then on the front side, as you can see, I put this metal plate on here. So the reason for this little spring mechanism is because this is pretty violent when it pops back. This Kickstarter has been way more complicated than I was hoping for it to be. So hopefully it works. Before I try to start the engine, I gotta do one last thing, and that's the exhaust. So I'm gonna rip through that real quick, and then we'll try to get this thing started. Some of the parts for the exhaust are coming from a previous project. So I'm gonna cut those off and then size some tubing for the new exhaust. So this is 1.5 inch tubing that I made into an S-bend. I thought it all looked cool, but in the end I tried a lot of different designs and I hated them all. So I ended up just making a short and stubby straight tube. So I cut out this piece of sheet metal and I'm hammering it into shape. This will be for like a heat protection, I guess, and so I don't burn my leg. I was also hitting the exhaust tube with the hammer to bend it, and I was leaving all these little marks in it, and I kind of liked it, so I kept hitting it a whole bunch and it gave it a texture. So the engine hasn't been started in maybe 8 months or so, so it took a little bit to get it going. I also didn't have the choke on. Yeah, when it backfires, it definitely kicks your leg up. It's kind of frightening. When the engine dies, it does one last rotation backwards, and then it slams the Kickstarter into itself. So I'm curious what you guys think of that. Is there something with the motor that I should be worried about? Is it like timing, or maybe I can put another one-way bearing on the driven side so that it won't kick backwards? I'm curious what your thoughts are.